Words can create physical sensations. A whispered phrase sends shivers down your spine. A perfectly timed sentence awakens something primal within you. This isn't coincidence or simple chemistry. It's the power of language intertwining with desire. Sigmund Freud illuminated something profound about our relationship with words. He recognized that language isn't merely communicative, it's a direct channel to our deepest yearnings and unacknowledged hungers. For women especially, whose desires have historically been suppressed or misunderstood, this connection between language and longing carries particular significance. Certain linguistic patterns bypass your conscious mind entirely. The right sentence, delivered in the right context, speaks directly to parts of yourself rarely acknowledged in day-to-day life. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding the psychology of how words resonate within us, especially within the female psyche, which has evolved unique responses to verbal stimuli that differ from typical male patterns. Language triggers unconscious desires through specific patterns that mirror our internal emotional landscapes. When we recognize how certain words create almost physical sensations of anticipation, connection, and desire, we gain insight not just into communication, but into what makes us fundamentally human. You've likely experienced it. Why particular phrases from a lover lingered in your thoughts for days, or why certain literary passages seem to speak to something beyond your conscious mind. This awareness doesn't diminish these powerful connections. It helps us understand and embrace the complex relationship between words and desire. Freud revolutionized our understanding of the human mind by suggesting that beneath our conscious thoughts lies a vast reservoir of unconscious desires. His concept of libido, psychic energy derived from our primal instincts, explains why certain words affect us on a visceral level. This energy, primarily sexual in nature, doesn't disappear when repressed. It transforms, finding expression through dreams, slips of the tongue, and our emotional responses to language. What Freud understood, perhaps before linguistics could prove it, was that words are never merely words. They carry emotional charges, unconscious associations, and hidden meanings. When someone speaks to you, two conversations occur simultaneously: the explicit exchange of information and a deeper, unspoken dialogue between unconscious minds. This is particularly relevant for women, whose relationship with desire has been complicated by societal expectations. Female desire has historically been pathologized, denied, or reduced to stereotypes. Yet research shows women often respond more powerfully than men to linguistic stimulation. The female arousal pattern frequently depends on context, suggestion, and narrative, precisely the domain where language holds its greatest power. When we speak, we communicate not just with words, but through tone, rhythm, and the spaces between words. The unconscious mind, attuned to these subtleties, responds to what remains unsaid as much as to what is explicitly expressed. This explains why clinical, direct language rarely evokes desire, while suggestive, layered communication, where meaning hovers just beyond immediate grasp, can be profoundly arousing. The psychology behind linguistic triggers lies in how they activate neural pathways associated with pleasure and anticipation. Certain words bypass our rational filters and speak directly to the limbic system, our emotional brain. This isn't pseudoscience. Neuroimaging studies confirm that evocative language activates the same brain regions as physical touch or visual stimulation. Words become charged through association. A neutral term gains erotic potential when repeatedly connected with pleasurable experiences. This explains why seemingly innocuous phrases from a lover can later trigger powerful responses. They've been unconsciously linked to moments of intimacy or vulnerability. Context amplifies this effect dramatically. The same sentence whispered in different settings produces vastly different responses. Your personal history with certain words creates unique trigger points in your linguistic landscape. What electrifies one woman might leave another cold, because we each carry different verbal associations based on our experiences. Studies on linguistic arousal reveal fascinating patterns. Words with soft consonants and elongated vowels tend to be perceived as more sensual across cultures. Rhythm that mimics physical movements, acceleration followed by pauses, can create bodily responses that mirror those of actual touch. The brain, in essence, doesn't always distinguish between well-crafted descriptions of sensations and the sensations themselves. So what makes a sentence powerful enough to trigger deep desire? The most effective combines several key elements: ambiguity, suggestion, and tension. Ambiguity creates space for the imagination. When a sentence can be interpreted in multiple ways, the mind naturally gravitates toward meanings that reflect inner desires. Consider the difference between "I want you" and "I've been thinking about you all day." The latter invites you to imagine what those thoughts might entail, becoming a canvas for projection. Suggestion works through implication rather than statement. Direct declarations of intent, "I find you attractive," actually limit response by closing interpretive possibilities. Suggestive language, "There's something about the way you move," opens pathways for the imagination to explore. Tension, the push and pull between revelation and restraint, mirrors the physical experience of desire itself. A sentence that builds anticipation before release, that withholds complete meaning while promising it, creates a linguistic echo of arousal. This explains why good poetry can feel almost physical in its impact. The structure of desire-triggering sentences often follows a pattern. They begin with connection, develop through validation, and culminate in possibility. The connection establishes resonance. "I noticed how you." Validation affirms the recipient's self-perception, which shows you're exceptional, Conchal. And possibility opens a door to what might follow, and makes me wonder what would happen if we. This structure works because it moves from the safety of acknowledgement to the excitement of potential, mirroring the psychological journey from comfort to arousal. The pace matters too. Rushing through destroys the effect, while deliberate pacing builds anticipation. What's remarkable is how these patterns transcend cultural boundaries while adapting to cultural contexts. Different societies develop unique verbal codes for expressing desire, yet the underlying psychological mechanisms remain consistent. In traditional Japanese culture, suggestion and indirection are highly valued, with desire often expressed through nature metaphors. Middle Eastern poetry historically used elaborate symbolism to veil explicit desire. Western European traditions range from the courtly love language of medieval times to the psychologically complex seduction narratives of the 18th century. These cultural expressions reflect different balancing points between restraint and revelation, but all recognize the power of language to evoke rather than describe desire. The magic happens not in explicit statement, but in the spaces between words where imagination flourishes. Gender differences add another dimension to these linguistic patterns. Research suggests women often respond more strongly to contextual language and narrative framing, while men may respond more directly to explicit terminology. This isn't universal. Individual differences always outweigh gender generalizations, but it helps explain why communication styles can sometimes feel mismatched between heterosexual partners. Women frequently report that what makes language arousing is its revelation of attention and perception. Being truly seen is often more powerfully arousing than being simply desired. A sentence that demonstrates careful observation, "I noticed how your expression changes when you talk about your work," creates more resonance than generic praise. This relates to women's evolutionary history, where assessing a potential partner's attentiveness and emotional intelligence carried significant survival advantages. The female brain developed heightened sensitivity to linguistic cues that might reveal these qualities. Throughout history, we can trace the evolution of desire-triggering language. Medieval courtly love poetry established elaborate codes of linguistic seduction. The 18th century brought psychological complexity to expressions of desire. The Victorian era drove explicit language underground, paradoxically increasing the power of suggestion and innuendo. Today's landscape is more complex than ever. Contemporary expressions of desire navigate between directness and nuance, between respect and passion. Digital communication has created new linguistic forms: the tension of waiting for a response, the intimate shorthand of private jokes, the power of words that appear on screen in the privacy of one's thoughts. The most effective modern desire-triggering sentences often acknowledge this complexity. They respect boundaries while creating space for possibility. They recognize that desire flourishes in the territory between safety and risk, between the familiar and the unknown. Understanding these patterns raises important ethical considerations. The line between persuasion and manipulation can blur. Language that bypasses conscious processing raises questions about consent and agency. Awareness of these psychological mechanisms becomes crucial for both speakers and listeners. Ethical communication of desire requires honesty about intentions and respect for boundaries. It recognizes that while words can powerfully evoke desire, they should never override conscious choice. The most meaningful exchanges happen when both parties understand the dance of suggestion and response, participating with awareness rather than being unwittingly influenced. This knowledge empowers rather than diminishes. Understanding why certain words affect you deeply doesn't reduce their impact. It helps you recognize genuine resonance and distinguish it from manipulation. It also helps you communicate your own desires more effectively, finding language that authentically expresses your internal landscape. Critical thinking serves as protection against unwanted influence. Recognizing when language is designed to trigger automatic responses allows you to pause and evaluate whether those responses align with your conscious wishes. This isn't about becoming immune to the power of words, but about engaging with that power mindfully. The most profound linguistic exchanges happen when both speaker and listener understand these dynamics. When someone crafts a sentence that resonates with your desires, recognizing your unique responses rather than applying generic formulas, the connection transcends technique. It becomes a genuine meeting of minds, unconscious speaking to unconscious, desire recognizing desire. This brings us back to Freud's fundamental insight. Language isn't separate from our deepest selves, but intimately connected to them. The sentences that trigger desire don't create something that wasn't there. They reveal and activate what already exists within us. They speak to hungers we may not acknowledge, but nevertheless feel. The power of such language doesn't lie in some magic formula or secret code. It emerges from deep attention to another person, from the courage to suggest rather than demand, and from creating linguistic spaces where desire can safely unfold. The one sentence that triggers deep desire isn't universal. It's uniquely calibrated to the person receiving it. In understanding these linguistic patterns, we gain insight not just into communication techniques, but into the architecture of desire itself. We see how words can create bridges between minds, how suggestion can be more powerful than statement, and how the spaces between words can become territories where connection deepens. This awareness transforms how we listen and how we speak. We become attuned to the subtleties of language, its rhythms, its implications, its emotional resonances. We recognize that in every conversation, something more than information is being exchanged. Each sentence carries the potential to create distance or intimacy, to awaken or suppress desire. The most powerful sentences aren't those that directly state desire, but those that create conditions where desire can authentically emerge. They demonstrate understanding, establish safety, and open possibilities. They recognize the other person as a complex being with their own internal landscape, not an object to be acted upon. In the end, language and desire remain beautifully, necessarily entangled. Words shape how we understand and experience our wants. They can illuminate desires we didn't know we had, or help us articulate those we couldn't previously name. They can create spaces of possibility where new forms of connection emerge. The sentence that triggers your deepest desire speaks to something essential about who you are. It resonates because it recognizes a truth about you that perhaps few others have seen, or that you rarely acknowledge yourself. When such a sentence finds you, the impact isn't just psychological, but physical. The boundary between word and sensation dissolves. This is the enduring magic of language, its ability to transform abstract symbols into felt experience, to translate thought into sensation. In understanding this process, we don't diminish its power. We appreciate more fully how remarkable it is that mere words can create such profound responses. By becoming more conscious of these linguistic patterns, we develop a deeper appreciation for language itself. We recognize that in every conversation lies the potential for revelation, for connection, for the awakening of desire. And in that recognition, we approach both our words and our desires with greater awareness, intention, and authenticity.